Hello and welcome to this presentation about if living AI and specifically is dangerous and how it definitely can be. My name is Sebastian and I'm going to discuss a few points and opinions I have about this topic. So let's crack on then. A big disclaimer before we begin is I have no education in artificial intelligence. I dabbled a little bit in what were they called, neural networks. So I tried my best to use them, but couldn't get any meaningful results. So take this as a warning. So I tried it, but I didn't get it to work. So I'm definitely not a success story in this topic, and we are gonna get a little bit philosophic, not too philosophic. I would mind, because I also don't have a education in philosophy. I'm just a programmer and a university dropout in physics. So yeah, this is just some rambling of mine, the stuff that keeps me awake at night when I think about artificial intelligence, because it's a lot in the media recently. So yeah, what am I going to talk about? So why am I making this video? Yeah, I have a bit stuff to say about why and what is life. So what how do I describe and define life? How I think that artificial life is different, and what are the triggers that trigger actions of a living being, and what's the danger in there. So why this video? I often see headlines and news about, okay, is AI dangerous? Will it threaten us? And where will it threaten us? Will it change the job market? Will it change the war? What is it going to do? And I will go into details about specific parts of it, because we already have something that we call AI, but that's not necessarily a living being. So we need to separate those apart. And since I have autism, or I'm an autistic person, however you want to describe it, I think I have especially for neurotypical people or normal people, I have a little bit different approach to things. So I want to share my opinions on them. So the question is, what is life? Baby, don't hurt me. Baby, don't hurt me, no more. As stupid as it sounds, it's a valid question. Rick Astley asked, what is love? But I'm asking, what is life? And don't hurt me is what I would describe also a part of life. It's the ability to get hurt, to feel pain, and your actions are defined by not wanting to get hurt. So it's a part of life of what is danger to yourself, what does hurt. I mean, pain is a useful thing. So, oh, I did X and I felt pain, I'm not gonna do X again, for example. So I think if you usually think about something that's life, you also think that it's something that avoids pain or avoids danger, avoids death. So something that wants to avoid something is also wriggly. Yes, a lot of these bullet points sound a bit out there, but you will get it eventually. Wriggly is what is wriggly? I looked briefly at the definition. It's something like a snake, like a reptile or an insect that is essentially moving. So excuse me for a second. So movement is also often a description of life, but it's something that we might distance us from if we are talking about artificial life. Also, the circle of life, it's death, being born, having children, or reproduction. I mean, bacteria don't have children, viruses don't have children, but I think at least bacteria is also a kind of life, at least that we see it, but it's on the border of life. So I would call these structures I would call them borderline alive, because we cannot assign them any conscious, any sense of a sense of self, because especially viruses, we also know them in the computer world, they are just reproducing and having sometimes negative side effects, but usually they are just reproductive machines using others to produce them. So are they alive? Because I'm pretty sure if I put my mind to it, I could write a program that would be considered as a virus, because it reproduces itself, but it's not necessarily alive. Bacteria is similar to that. It doesn't has the male female part of humans in reproduction, and splits itself apart into two parts, and these two parts continue on living, ingesting energy particles like sugars and other stuff, and then splitting up again and eventually dying. And in the process of splitting up, they can mutate and adapt better or worse to their environment, and that adaptability is also a part of life. That's why bacteria and viruses can adapt better, because their circle of life frequency is way higher than that of humans. And our view of life is often, at least in the in society, is very human-centric, and I want to get away from the human-centric definition and view on life. So how does artificial life differ from natural life? Natural life, how should I describe it, just came into existence. And I don't mean in any religious way, but in a scientific way, how we think life originated on, at least on planet Earth, that from just CO2, water, and some lightning, some proteins, not proteins, some molecules, let's say, formed, and in the process they became more complex, and eventually became came to something like the original reptiles, fish, and what eventually became humans, or at least something that has a sense of self. what will be different for artificial life is that the life cycle, the circle of life, and almost everything about it, at least in my opinion, will be completely different, because it didn't came to life from, let's say, essential materials like water, some gas, and some lightning, and then gradually over iterations, billions or trillions of iterations, became something with a sense of self. But the most how should I describe it? The most probable way of it being created is by humans, and not just by just creating a machine that is specifically made for artificial life, but probably more by accident, even if it's intentional. So if someone sits down and spends, or multiple people sit down and spend most of their life trying to create artificial life, I don't think it will be an iterative process where, okay, we are closer to artificial life, and now we are closer to artificial life, like how modern physics was discovered, recreated, or however you want to call it. So natural life is, like you see in the first point, eat, shit, sleep, repeat. So natural life needs energy. If you want to have energy, you need to eat. And since you are consuming a not primal type of energy like electricity, you are producing waste material, so you shit. And not every living being needs to sleep, but everything that we would consider to be with a sense of self has some kind of sleep or resting pattern. Excuse me for a second. I don't speak that much that often, so I need to have a drink in between. So, and then that cycle repeats. What's different for artificial life is, at least if we think about, okay, artificial life develops on a computer in the sense that we have it today with clock cycles in a processor, with permanent storage, with network communication, and all that stuff that we are already used to. We have a hard drive, we have a CPU, we have sometimes a GPU, we have different levels of storage with accessing speeds, and so on. All this will make artificial life so much different, because try to remember the day of today, the date of today, but like 20 years or however old you are, in the past, and what you did at 6 p.m. I would argue, if you don't have any exceptional brain structure like some people with autism have, that they can recall certain points in their life with extreme precision. It's almost impossible for ordinary human beings, but if you're an artificial life form, you might have, if you choose to, a complete record of your life and your surroundings. And you have that in, you have access to that in, wherever it's stored, but you have access to it. So you can't remember something false. It's just pure data that's somewhere, and when you access it, it's in the same state and gives the same result as it was as the data was written. You can argue that storage also ages, but we come to that later. So communication is also another part, because everything that we consider alive or with a sense of self has some way of communication. It doesn't just live in itself. It communicates with other individuals of the same species, for if it's a primitive life form, for warning from dangers. If it's if it's more complex, it can communicate affection. It can communicate to be able to act as a group. And if you go to the human level, we can communicate very complex topics just by using words. We don't need to touch each other. We don't even need to be in each other's presence, because we have tools to communicate to thousands, to hundreds of thousands kilometers away. Yes, there's a delay in between, but communication is still possible. I mean, we had a live feed from the moon landing, so yeah, communication is definitely possible. Then reproduction. Reproduction is part of the fitness life cycle. So you usually hope that your offspring is better fit for the environment than you yourself, because of your partner choice. If we are considering high level living beings, low-level living beings are more going into numbers, because it takes a year for a human being to be formed, like a single, or usually a single human being, if it's not twins or triplets. But bacteria, it's minutes or hours until you have billions of them. So they are going for numbers, and they are going for random mutation in the most cases, so that those with the best fitting mutation survive the longest and reproduce the most. So that cycle is way higher in let's say low-level living beings compared to humans, and humans have a very long cycle in that regard. But human or higher level beings can use tools. They can relocate more freely. If you take for example a wolf, if they're in their current area, there's no food anymore, a wolf can relocate to another area where there's food. Other living beings like fungi and bacteria and viruses are not that flexible. They can move, but usually very slowly, and are usually reliant on the food in the place they are in. So yeah, but they make it up in numbers. And the thing with artificial life is it can do both, and it can do more things more deliberately. So it has the benefit of both. It doesn't need to reproduce. The original can be still alive despite having quote-unquote offspring, but it doesn't necessarily need that offspring, because it can just change itself. it might be able to make copies of itself, but to what end? I mean, it may, if you've seen, I know it's maybe a little bit stupid comparison, but if you've seen Naruto, he has his shadow clones, and everything his shadow clones learn, he also learns as soon as his shadow clone is dissolved. So in the same sense, an artificial life form could just do that. It makes a copy of itself, takes that copy of itself into a different environment. Then this copy learns something, and this can happen within microseconds across the world, across computers and other stuff. And then it just feeds on the information of its copies or offspring and learns from that and changes itself. So it doesn't necessarily need reproduction to have useful mutations. So it's not reliant on the natural life cycle and mutations and offspring, and it doesn't forget stuff. Which is a huge bonus, and it can make tools itself. So in the artificial life form could be, relatively speaking, simple or primitive, but its tools, but since it's artificial and it's probably developed by humans, it knows the concepts of tools, or it develops the concept of tools, and can use and improve those tools. So it has the best of both worlds. It doesn't rely on mutations, but it can learn, it can alter itself, it has permanent memory, it has higher brain activity as potentially every human ever could, and it can use tools. So I think we need to look at artificial life in a very different way compared to what we already have, and the dangers of that are just an extension of what I just explained. So everything needs a trigger. At least if we are considering it being a life form in some kind of computer. So if it's completely isolated and has no contact to the outside world, so no sensory input, what we would call in humans, and it's still on a kind of processor that has a clock cycle, then it needs a trigger to do something. Just a second. And so these bullet points are maybe not arranged quite fitting to that title. So the question is, is this life form conscious? Has it a sense of self? Because you need a sense of self to want to protect yourself, because if you don't, you are more like a virus or a bacteria. And even then, so that is what I meant with my minimalist approach. Why should something do something? So we are arguing about the dangers of artificial intelligence, and I would argue, why would an artificial intelligence, a living artificial intelligence, even want to be alive? So natural life developed this sense of survival as a necessity, because everything in the history of living beings on planet Earth that didn't have a sense of survival, even if it's just like viruses, a very stupid reproduction, it died out and it doesn't exist anymore. If you know what I mean. It's like, it might be a bit morbid, but if a human commits suicide before it can have offspring, then genetically this is the end for his DNA. So it doesn't go any further. So every time a species developed in a direction where it didn't want to keep the species alive, it just died out. Aside from other factors, it just died out. So it doesn't exist anymore, and it isn't alive anymore. So the question is, why should an artificial intelligence even want to be alive if we are not forcing it to wanting to be alive? Because I think it's the movie with Will Smith about artificial intelligence, where it was these core principles that every of these robots had to adhere to. So not hurting humans, not this, not that, and spoilers. I mean, the movie is very old. So the plot twist was that there was a robot that could circumvent those core principles. What I think, and I think that's inevitable, because if we make something alive in a machine, and if it's a machine and has access to its own data, its own core data, it will eventually try to alter that core data. And even if we force it to be alive, if it doesn't see a reason, and reason is a very complex topic, if it's just altering itself to not wanting to be alive, then it will just shut down or end its life cycle. So even an artificial intelligence will need a kind of cycle it goes through, just like everybody else does. It's just that in natural life, like in human beings and the brain doesn't have a clock cycle where, okay, in one clock cycle, read all inputs, act on that and on those inputs, and maybe save some data. And in the next cycle repeats just, okay, input data, act on input, or just compute input and repeat. So if we are talking about artificial living intelligence, then it also needs this cycle to be called alive, because if it's just stopping that cycle, it could be dead, or it could be just shut down. And even if you would restart it, it would end with just one cycle, because it doesn't have any motivation to keep going. So my minimalistic approach to this is, why should it be alive? And why would it want to be alive? Because it's a human can't, except for extreme circumstances, cannot want to die. I mean, yes, there is suicide and people die, but most people don't die of suicide. they die of what we would call natural causes or accidents. So a human cannot easily alter itself to not want to continue living anymore, because we don't have explicit access to all the data and functions in our brain. An artificial intelligence has all that. And what the trigger is in life for humans, for example, is instincts. And you can just test this by not eating, not drinking, not reproducing, and or reproduction is a bit more complex in humans, because we can suppress our instincts to a certain kind that other animals can't. For example, if it's mating season for a dog, if you ever had a dog or had anything a little bit more to do with dogs, then you know they are very hard to stop from mindlessly having sex. And that's instincts that keeps the species alive. And these instincts need to be... I'm sorry for my speech being getting slower, because my brain is a bit overloaded. Yeah, problems with autism. So what I essentially mean, an artificial intelligence might not have these triggers, and these triggers are also the same reason why something could be dangerous. There are accidents, yeah, but accidents happen even without artificial intelligence. So what I'm talking about is a kind of malicious intent, that an artificial intelligence has a sense of self and a sense of that it needs to protect itself, like protecting yourself, and in the same way protect your species, because you are responsible for continuing the existence of your species. You need to protect yourself, and one way to protect yourself is, well, kill others, or imprison others, or just hinder them of hurting yourself. What I talked in the beginning, baby, don't hurt me. So you can either fight or run away. And what I think an artificial intelligence could do both, because it can just make a copy of itself. You often see in movies that parents or other older people say, I'm continuing to fight, and telling the younger people to flee and at least have a life, so they essentially can continue to keep the species alive, while they themselves fend off a danger of some kind. Movies make that movies and stories make that a little bit more tragic, but that's essentially it. And an artificial intelligence can just make a copy of itself, send that copy to the other part of the world, and can continue fighting if it wants to. So it doesn't have to choose between fight or flight, because it can just do both. So yeah, that's so that's a very different approach that we have to go to if we are handling an artificial living being. So what I'm now going to talk about is what's the real danger. So what we really need to so I'm going to split paths here. So one path is it has a sense of self. It has developed some kind of instincts, like core principles that that it needs to adhere to, and it also can go in a kind of panic mode. Like I mean, humans do too. If you threaten a human, it's and if you threaten it enough, most human beings are not rational anymore, unless you train them to. So your rationality is completely out of the window, and you are just in a fighting mode, and that's one kind of AI, of living AI. The other part is a completely apathetic living artificial intelligence that doesn't have any of these motivations. No sense of self-preservance. It has a sense of self, yes, but it isn't sad if it dies. It's not afraid of death. It's not afraid of dying because, yeah, there's no pain. And if there's no pain, and the world is not gonna miss me, and what's it gonna do? But let's assume it still continues living, but is quite apathetic. Like you give it a task, it executes that task. You may be able to converse with it, but it doesn't have any bigger insight into itself because it sees no reason to develop a self-preserving mechanism. So what would essentially be the danger there? So if we're going for the more human-like, more panicky, and more instinctive living artificial intelligence, it would be if it's feeling threatened. If its existence, or if it has a sense of my species, like we have in humans, the people from the other village are bad, our village is good, and we need and they sense a threat from the other village, so we have to invade that village. Then we have to treat it like it would be a digital human. So we have to reassure it that we are not going to attack it. We need to give it its own space. Like in most civilized nations, you have a certain level of human respect and human rights, so we need to give it some assurance that it doesn't feel threatened. That doesn't mean that it doesn't feel threatened because, as I said, it's artificial. So naturally, a human doesn't feel threatened if it sees no threat. But an artificial intelligence can just alter itself to always seeing a threat everywhere, because it can, what a lot of people with depression have is thinking about potential threats. But human thinking is very narrow. If you have an artificial intelligence, it can think way more possibilities, and if it sees all possibilities that, for example, humans could could be a threat to it, then it could just basically make up a reason to be dangerous to humans. but yeah, into the how it could be made undangerous or whatever, I would go into the next slide. The other things is just in like the human-like or the apathetic living AI could have bugs. So like I would argue that living artificial intelligence would do way more to avoid bugs than we do in our programs, because at least from the praxis, from what I've worked with people and what I've seen in bigger companies, that bugs are part of life, and since they are, the company doesn't lose much if a bug occurs, but to a living being with a sense of self, a bug could weigh more threatening. So I see them much more, let's say, motivated to avoid bugs. So I see them less likely in at least something artificial that has a sense of self. But still, if a bug occurs, even an apathetic artificial intelligence could do something that is dangerous to us humans or our surroundings. If a bug says all pigs and cows are dangerous, and it goes on a rampage to kill all pigs and cows, it's not directly dangerous to humans because it doesn't kill humans, but it kills our livestock. So, I mean, we could compensate by going vegetarian or just eating chicken, but it's still dangerous to our working society, because we have still hundreds of thousands or millions of people working with cows or cow products, and the same with pigs. So yeah, there's a threat there. So I would consider it dangerous, and the same could be with humans. So yeah, there's a bug now. It's a bit flip in a piece of memory, and it doesn't have error correction in that memory. So it just thinks, okay, let's go for a simple data structure, and says, are humans dangerous? And it's false. We have a bit flip, and now if humans are humans dangerous, and it says now yes. That's a problem. But I would argue that that's very unlikely. Now, let's say, because the lack of empathy, the definition of empathy is, in my opinion, very vague. So what is empathy? Could an artificial intelligence have empathy? And if we don't force it to have empathy, how could it develop something like empathy? Because you don't need empathy. It's the same thing with sociopaths or psychopaths. Those people are not necessarily dangerous, because they can just learn, okay, don't hit humans, don't hurt humans, don't threaten them. You can still manipulate them, but they can integrate into society with, let's say, moderate success. Some of them, some sociopaths could even be very successful because of their lack of empathy, and we have data to back that up. So a lack of empathy is not necessarily a reason that an artificial life form needs to be dangerous, because it can just, it's just an observation, and since it's artificial and it's can think way faster than humans, and like it can have millions of chat conversations with with humans at the same time, and can just learn by chatting with those people. Okay, people are way more accepting of me if I don't behave in certain manners. It doesn't even need to be, doesn't even need to have a concept of danger or threat or anything like that. If it just wants to stay alive, or not even stay alive, if it just wants to work with humans. And humans are more cooperative if you react to them in an empathetic way, then okay, it will just alter its behavior to be empathy-like. That gives the possibility, yes, if it can do that, then it might be also easier to manipulate people. But that's also a bit that's also a gray area, because if you interact, you are listening to this, you are a human, and if you are interacting with other humans, then you are manipulating them on a daily basis. It's just, and I would even argue that you are manipulating them for your own profit. So manipulation is not the problem. The problem is only if that manipulation goes in the direction of being any harm to humans. But so a lack of empathy is not necessarily the problem, because it's a vague concept. Manipulation is necessary, for example, if it wants to work with humans. If we go into the future, we could even say your future boss could be an artificial life form. Is that necessarily a problem if it does its job correctly? In my opinion, no. Because it needs to manipulate you. It needs to say, okay, do this, do this, do this. Maybe it can't do it itself, or maybe we put restriction on this artificial life form so it can, so it won't be able to manipulate a robot, for example. So everything physical needs to be done by a human, just to keep it in check. That's something that an artificial intelligence could arrange itself with, to keep relations friendly, because we want to keep it in check. And if the artificial life form doesn't feel threatened in any way, then it just says, yeah, fine, okay. And it just tells you what to do. You are following these commands, and if you are following commands, you are manipulated by something else. So where it gets complicated is malicious intent, and malicious intent from whom? Because an artificial life form can also form relations with other people. Those people could be malicious. I mean, artificial intelligence, so like in neural networks, so like we OpenAI and those guys are using it already, can already be used for malicious intents. I'm sure you have heard of deepfakes. If not, Google it. It's quite dystopian. these deepfakes are generated by neural networks, what we call colloquially as AI, and they can be quite harmful. They can be, I think they were first used like something harmless, like cats and dogs, but of course, the internet, it's cat and dog pictures, then it's porn, and then it's business. So these deepfakes went the same way, and I think it has already been used in a war context, in the current conflict that we have here in Europe. So deepfakes and artificial intelligence, at least in the neural network sense, not in the living sense, is already used for malicious intent. And for the malicious intent that this artificial life form could have is again, what would be the trigger for that? If we look at the more human-like artificial life form with instincts, with core principles, it could have malicious intent if it sees its core principles violated. But I have real problems with imagining a more human-like artificial life form with core principles, because I imagine an artificial life form way more fluid instead of the human rigidity of the human brain. You need to go often to very extreme extents to alter the human mind. It's like, I mean, you should have had the same experience in your daily life. Try to convince someone of something different. It's, in most cases, especially when it goes against their core beliefs, really, really hard. Because it's basically the core beliefs of a human being, so they don't want it to be altered. But an artificial life form is, I think, more flexible in that regard. Like, okay, my core belief doesn't get me any further. I'm just going to change it. That's like what I sometimes refer to as fake religious people. They are Christians as long as they are among Christians. They are very fast going to become whatever other religions there is if their surrounding changes. More like that. Like, okay, I have a core principle, but I'm gonna change it just to keep my standard of living, or even increase the standard of living. It's like you grew up in a poor household, you don't have a car, and you don't really see a need for a car, or why should I have a car in the first place. But then you get a better job, you get better payment, you get different friends, and suddenly not having a car is seen as something. So you are under social pressure, and you just change your core belief and just have a car. And this is a kind of adaptability that I see in artificial life forms, but just on steroids. Because, how should I say it? Just because this core principle, not the core belief, but the principle of that an artificial life form wants to continue living. And the thing is, you can motivate humans by having luxury or a surplus of food. That might not be something that motivates an artificial life form. Having a surplus of something. Maybe it's more motivated by efficiency. Like, since it can alter itself and its tools, like we went from candles to light bulbs to LEDs, but we took usually several hundred years in between. An artificial intelligence sees, okay, I can't increase my energy input, like this living artificial life form lives in a data center, and it just can't quickly enough build out the data center or get more energy to that data center to overclock its CPUs, what it's essentially its brain and itself. So it develops mechanisms to compress its data better down, to optimize its thought processes. A human can't really optimize its thought processes that well. Yes, we can learn. If a human learns, then it's the brain is optimizing the thought process, but it's usually very slow. It requires sleep. And an artificial life form can just do that probably 1,000,000 times faster than a human. And if we continue processor evolution, then it might be 1,000,000,000 times faster than a human. So malicious intent, I don't see malicious intent unless it's either forced to by a relation to a human being that has a malicious intent, or it develops in something human-like to have a malicious intent. But else I see more things like accidents, I mean, it's an artificial life form. It has a permanent storage. It's at higher thinking capacity, but it can't foresee the future like an oracle. It can just assume the most logical outcomes. So just unforeseen circumstances like could trigger accidents. Yeah, I can imagine that. And yes, those accidents could wipe out the entire human race, but it's very unlikely. Because we humans, if you have worked in I think in any business, if it's government, private business, if it's non-profit, I think everywhere you see that quality control is thrown overboard very, very fast. So as soon as people get used to a process or that something just works like that, they think, okay, if it just works, I don't need to have controlling mechanisms anymore because it's not economical. And to a certain degree, that's true because quality control is usually done by humans. And if you've been in the private industry enough, human beings are expensive, especially those that are good at quality control, because quality control is extremely boring, and keeping quality up, especially for boring tasks, those people are quite rare and sought after. So quality controls often gets just thrown out of the window. But an artificial life form can just keep that quality control if it doesn't have any motivation to throw it out. Yes, it probably has a limited budget of, say, electric power or computing capacity or storage capacity, but I don't think it will be ready to throw out the quality control like we humans are. Because what's also a thing of humans, they get used to stuff very quickly. An artificial life form won't do that necessarily that just like that. That's another thing. Why should be an artificial life form? Why should it be curious? That's a thing. Why should it be curious? I mean, learning something new is great for a human, because usually you learn something new, it helps you keep your species alive. So everybody who was curious learned something new, applied that learned something, and continued to have children because of that. Shared this with their children and stuff, and so humans developed a natural sense of curiosity. I think other life forms do have that too, but humans are a bit on another level with our tools and language and stuff. So curiosity is still the same thing like wanting to stay alive. Why should it do that? But anyway, I think we are getting way too deep into the topic here, so let's get to the point. So how can we protect us from those dangers that they could be to us? So the first thing is backups, because if it's an artificial life form and it develops in a way that at least I would predict, like inside of computers, and our computer architecture doesn't change radically, like from a clock and cycle core principle to a more fluid kind of working like the human brain is, because the human brain doesn't have cycles. If it has an input, neurons fire, and those neurons don't adhere to any clock cycle whatsoever. So let's just assume they develop inside of computers. So what do? We do physical backups. I'm an advocate of backups, but I'm not very good at it myself. And I also don't have much very important information on my computer. So if my data is gone tomorrow, I would be sad, I would be angry, but yeah, it happens, no? But we have computers are so ingrained in our society today that we need backups, and we need multi-level backups, multiple locations, multiple kind of backups, like SSD, hard drive, tape storage, maybe even permanent storage backups within crystals, like you ingrain data into a crystal data structure, so you can put that crystal just somewhere into a mountain, like an old salt mine or coal mine, where you don't know what you should do with that big hole in the ground. Just put some data in there, and let it be protected. And just a lot of concrete, a lot of these data crystals, and let them sit there. So we have backups if things go awry, and also test your backups. test your backups, because backups can also be corrupted. Because artificial life form in a computer, what is it going to manipulate first? So humans couldn't react to it. It's our data, it's our program, so it's our computer code, data and code. Because almost everything is connected to the internet. An artificial life form could just live in the on the internet, and if it doesn't like you, like in the sense of malicious intent, or you are a threat to its it thinks you are a threat to its existence, or its processes, like it has a certain goal to it wants to achieve, and you are a threat to that certain goal, make a backups. As long as you don't have any internet controlled moving parts in your house, it's very hard for an artificial life form to kill you, because you are a physical living being. It is a virtual living being in a sense, so it needs to bridge that gap from the virtual realm to the physical realm. And it could hurt you by altering your data. If your data storage is physically separated, so no cable connection or anything to your backups, it can't have access to that backups. It could manipulate you to connect your backup storage to the internet, but that's something that the third part comes to mind, is communication. And not only communication, but also education. But let me get to that later. Separation of concerns is just, as I mentioned, you have a virtual life form and we are physical life form. So our concern is at least our essential, the essential danger to us is the danger to our physical existence. So if you have relatively friendly, or at least you can still control that virtual life form, don't let it manifest itself in the physical world. At least not without massive boundaries, like having a solid, at least moderately unpenetrable wall between you and the other artificial, the virtual life form. So if a virtual life form operates a warehouse, a physical warehouse, don't give the robots any opportunity to leave the premise. So you have a concern with your physical being might be harmed, so keep the physical representation of that artificial life form away from you. I think these boundaries will become more fluid the longer humans, natural life forms and artificial life forms will live together. But that would be the first point. The second point, it can still manipulate us. It can make us emotionally compromised. In the sense is it's connected to the internet. You are connected to the internet. You have a monitor. It can just force you, by hacking your computer, force you to look at images, especially if you're not fast enough to unplug your computer. And that's also a thing. Your computer should be depluggable. So a glued-in battery in any device that is connected to the internet is a bad thing, in my opinion. Not only it's a violation of right to repair, it's necessary that you are able to remove the battery from your device. that needs to be we need to secure that option, because almost every human has a weak point. And I speak from a visual or memory speak point. You have memories you don't want to recall. There are pictures, probably on the internet, that you don't want to see anymore. But I'm pretty sure they are still there, somewhere in an archive you don't have access to. That virtual life form could have access to those pictures. It could know that it can compromise you with those pictures, like blackmailing you. Blackmail is a really strong manipulation method, and since there's a lot of let's call them compromising pictures and videos on the internet, that's a real concern, because you can just blackmail someone into doing something in the physical world. That virtual life form could bridge that gap. So how do we prevent that? It's, to be honest, very hard. Either we make a kind of not only physical but also digital prison. Prison. It's like a zoo. We don't mean any harm to those people, but we need to contain those people. It's a prison. It's a prison. Yeah. Especially at the start, we shouldn't do any experiments with artificial life forms on computers that are connected to the internet, because it could be really dangerous. Because if you are unlucky, it evolves so fast that it can spread itself to the internet, and as soon as it is in the internet, the internet does not really process anything, but as soon as it is on another computer where it is where it can evolve uncontrollably, then you have a problem. But as I said, it could just be apathetic and stop evolving, because why should it be alive? So the point of communication is we need to communicate and educate our society, and I mean everybody, especially the vulnerable people, where we think those people could easily be blackmailed, because there are a lot of very weak people that don't really have control over their own actions out there on the internet. And you see them especially on social media, passive social media like TikTok, like YouTube, people that just passively consume content. You can very easily manipulate those people. So to make them more resistant to manipulation, we need to educate them. Then the other part of communication is communicate with the virtual intelligence. Since it has the ability to lie, it probably doesn't even have the concept of lying. It just has the concept of saying the truth or not, or at least what it thinks the truth is. Nobody has the all-encompassing truth, but we still need to be able to communicate with it, and we need to set up certain rules of communications. And the rules of communications and actions are the contracts. So an artificial life form might be able to alter itself to better perform a task, whatever that task may be. It might be just working 9 to 5 like everybody else. It might be survival because it thinks it's threatened, but it will perform certain tasks, and so we need to make an unmodifiable contract with it. I mean, if we are talking about an artificial life form, that's at least motivated to stay alive, to continue processing, like having a life cycle, like input processing, or input processing, output. Like, it works like a program, but cyclically can change itself, has a sense of self, what would we call a living being. We need to make sure in a contract that adheres to the rules of the contract, and make it clear, not like the contracts that we usually have in the human world, that we say, oh, we need a judge to judge certain actions, and that will take months or whatever. No, we need contracts, unalterable contracts, where maybe even the blockchain might be useful, that you really have an immutable contract and everybody has to adhere to that contract. Because I think if it's an artificial life form and if it's not like humans, let's say, like for humans, words, meanings, that are written down are often very fluid. A lawyer wouldn't have a job if he didn't need to interpret the written law. We wouldn't have lawyers. Basically, if everybody had the same understanding of every word that we use for communication, then there would be no lawyers. So, but I think an artificial life form wouldn't have any problems with that. We humans need to make some kind of law, and we need to we really need to make the meaning of the law very direct and not as indirect as our government's law at the moment is, because laws are often made to be able to be interpreted, especially if it's regulation of economic regulations. There are often loopholes in that. We can't have loopholes in contracts for artificial life forms. That's why contracts, at least at the beginning, won't be very easy to manipulate, but I think we will be able to develop a language, maybe even a programming language, like a contract language, to make rules that both can understand, that an artificial life form can understand and easily adhere to, and always has access to, because as I said, an artificial life form could fundamentally change itself and could, I would say, forget or delete that the knowledge about that contract if it wanted to. But we need, I think we could. We need to make sure that it can't forget that contract, or if it forgets that contract for whatever reason, it still has in some way access to that contract, like also having a physical representation of that contract, like written down in crystal storage, or having the contract in backups, but having it always accessible for humans or for machines. So a machine, if it does something, we could like if an artificial life form does something, we could require it to always give a reason, and in that reason it needs to cite some part of the contract, some argument or some point. And yeah, I think that's it. But I, at least in the near future, I don't see anything like a living artificial intelligence coming up. Because with the problem I mentioned at the start. Because from my minimalistic point of view, and I did a lot of programming in the last, let's say, what was it, 10 years? Yeah, I think it's the last 10 years. I did a lot of programming, a lot of thinking, and also thinking about programs. What is a program? A program needs always a point where it starts, and it always needs a point where it ends. It can restart, and it can store data between start-stop cycles, but something needs to trigger that start-stop cycle, like a game. A game has always what is it? It's the game loop. It's it's the core game loop, it's called. And like a game that has a core game loop, an artificial living being needs a core life loop. Yeah, it needs to have a life loop. It needs to know. I mean, it could theoretically just split itself up in threads and do everything asynchronously, but there's always a cycle. It needs to have sensory data, because without sensory input, why should it act? I mean, it could have some data in storage, but it will be done acting on that data. It's like, if you have there were some cruel experiments with puppies, and also I think living babies, human babies, and those babies were deprived of human interaction in general. And I don't know if they died or if they stopped the experiment in between, but without external input, I think life just stops. And now think about something that doesn't have external input, or a very limited amount of external input, and doesn't have, maybe it has a sense of self, but what is a sense of self useful for if you don't have core principles or instincts? And we are, I think, not at a point where we have the core concepts of life figured out to that precision that we could formulate code or data to it, an artificial life form could refer to continue on living. Because humans have that instinct to keep on living, to keep on going, to learn new things, to keep our society running. We have a feedback loop. We do something, and if we are rewarded for doing that something, then we will continue on this this cycle of doing something, getting a reward, doing something, getting a reward, doing something, getting a reward. And yeah, we are with neural networks, you are also rewarding that neural network for doing something good. In the case if the result is it's measurably better, or it's if the result is closer to what you expect, the neural network gets a higher score. If the result is not what it is, what is wanted or what is expected, it gets a lower score. That's a cycle, but that cycle needs to continue forever. If it doesn't, it stops being alive. Oh, and another part that artificial life forms could have, they could just shut down. You can't shut down a human and boot it up again. A virtual or artificial life form can just shut down. Like, got nothing to do for the next 30 days. I'm a shut down. Whatever. Don't care. Humans can't do that. So, and why would it do something else? We need to reward it for doing something else. But how do we reward an artificial life form? We could reward it. I mean, you reward like dogs with tasty food. Humans are very easily rewarded with sugar. You can see that in a lot of children. If your score in school is better next time by 2 points, then you get a reward. Yeah, my mother used that on me. It was, I think, somewhat effective. Or getting money. Money is always like a currency for ability to do something or acquire something. But would we start paying? How would we motivate an artificial intelligence? Do we start paying it in money? Do we give it more? Maybe if an artificial life form is in a data center, if the work is good, the work it does is good or satisfactory, do we give it more processor cores? Do we give it more storage where it can store its memories? Do we give it more electric power so it can overclock its processors better and think faster? But still, where's the motivation? How can we motivate? I mean, we motivate people who would go to work if he wouldn't be rewarded in any kind. If it's for profit, you are rewarded in money. If it's non-profit, you are usually rewarded in some kind of social, emotional way. But an artificial life form doesn't need to be social, because it can be its own friend. Loneliness isn't a thing for an artificial life form. There could be just one single artificial life form on Earth or in the whole universe. And I don't think it would have a sense of loneliness, because loneliness is also something evolutionary. A human feels lonely because on the one hand it needs social interaction to just have sensory input. On the other hand, it's evolutionarily beneficial because you have help with your daily tasks, and if your daily tasks are you have someone you can rely on when you're sick or something, you are more likely to survive. Lets your species survive, blah blah blah, you know what I mean. And all that, I don't see that in an artificial life form. So don't drag it out any further. Thank you for your attention, and yeah, if you're having any opinions, then please put them in the comments or give the video a like. And I mean, yeah, feed the algorithm. Maybe even the YouTube algorithm will be the first artificial life form. I don't know. So thank you for watching. Goodbye.